So, what's possible for the macro grid? Well, staying within that same report for the MPUC and the Visual Capitalist, modernizing the grid has several key components. And it's also important to recognize that 70% of the US grid transmission lines and transformers are over 25 years old and need to be upgraded anyway. In key areas to help heal and create a more efficient grid are integrating energy storage, more intelligent technologies to create more efficiency, and really break away from the 65% we're currently losing as rejected energy, and then creating microgrids, smaller local grids that are decentralized power generation and storage. And in this model, they see that we need to increase our interregional transmission capacity by 160%, and that'll cost about 330 billion in additional power system investments. Now, NREL, take building on that same SEAM study, has several different approaches to create what is called the super grid. And this is where moving from that incredibly inefficient high transmission system to instead building in ultra high voltage AC lines that operate at 800 kV and also ultra high voltage DC current transmission backbone that will really allow us to be able to not only share power more efficiently, but begin to heal that seam problem and our ability to be able to share energy across the entire republic through the major components of the macro grid. And this is not a new idea. The first continental power system was first proposed in 1923. And as we look at creating this super grid of high capacity transmission lines, it's really going to allow us to share that power efficiently and move it much more intelligently across the entire republic. So the key thing that we need to move from is a centralized hub and spoke model to decentralized and then to distributed. And by doing this, not only can we create massive efficiencies by beginning to remove that 65% of rejected or lost power in the centralized system, but it's also part of the very fragile system that our current grid is, where we have blackouts and power outages because one part of the grid is broken and many parts then go down. As we move to more decentralized, we get much increased reliability and resiliency. And then as we move to distributed generation, storage, and electric vehicle charging, it almost becomes unbreakable except for direct physical damage into the distributed grid. But even when that damage happens, whether it's through, a natural disaster or a fire or a major storm, it has a much greater capacity to heal at the edges. So what we're going to have is much increased resiliency and reliability, along with huge increases in efficiency as we move to a decentralized and distributed grid. And to really give some key metrics, in centralized generation, what we have is a one-way flow of electrons, where shared infrastructure with many users connected to a centralized network, and it's really a one-to-one network with centralized control and management. It has a very limited flexibility. As we move to decentralized, what we're going to get is more of a two-way flow of electrons, but it'll be more limited, an ability to isolate infrastructure and integrate into the existing centralized network, more decentralized control and management with increased flexibility, but still largely one-to-one networks. And then as we move to a fully distributed supergrid, we'll have a full two-way flow of electrons with shared infrastructure between multiple networks, centralized and decentralized control management with maximum flexibility, and many-to-many networks. And this comes from Navigate Consulting. And then just really looking at the two grids side by side, from the centralized system to the decentralized and distributed, as the power will flow from within and from the bottom up and inside out of the system. And what we're really talking about is the birth of the internet, the energy network. And one key way to think about this is what the internet is to information, the internet is to power. And we have a deep dive on the internet at butterflypower.org/internet. But if you go back just 15 or 20 years to the growth of the internet, the concept that you would be able to go anywhere and get free access or very inexpensive access to high speed internet really wasn't part of our reality. And where we're moving now is just the way we have this super capacity to move data and information. We now are at the birth of the internet where we're going to be able to do the exact same thing with electrons and with energy. And when we look at the internet layered structure, this is really a bottom up and inside out transformation. So from the bottom up, what we're creating is microgrids, which are really composed of nanogrids, microgrids, neighbor grids, or community grids, sharing power from the bottom up, and then moving into the macro grids of the utility scale, the regional grid, and the global grid. And then it's also an inside out transformation where, as opposed to centralized, from the nano grid level, we have generation, storage, sensors, and processing power. Then moving into the microgrids that have a mirror of these exact same systems that then flow into the distribution grid, that then move into the regional grid, that then move into the global grid. So this bottom up and inside out transformation with the internet creates this radical efficiency and resiliency. So, taking another macro picture, looking at the last 300 years of human history and charting human population, we can see that we hit our first 1 billion humans in 1800. And then by 1930, we hit 2 billion, first doubling, and that then doubled again by 1975. That then brought us to the current day where we have the next doubling, which was almost 8 billion by 2022. And if we chart the yearly energy consumption in terawatt hours, what we can see is that really for the first 1 billion humans was powered by primary energy, which was wood and hydro in the form of solar, right? And that these represent really environmental income, meaning they're renewable and much more regenerative. But as the human population grew, really with the advent of coal, and we had our first coal power plant in 1875, and then our first internal combustion engine in 1886, and the first electric vehicle in 1889. And then we brought in petroleum, natural gas, and nuclear energy started to come in the 1970s. And so this growth of human population was really primarily powered by secondary energy sources, which were hydrocarbon sources, coal, and that these represent environmental capital versus environmental income. And then we've had since the 1950s, really the expansion of primary energy systems in the form of wind, solar, bio, and geo. And while we're not totally clear on the estimates, a lot of predictions show that by 2050 or 2100, we're going to get an additional 2 billion humans. So no longer is the human population going to be doubling. But what we see is possible is we now have the ability to make the quantum leap to being powered by primary energy. So primary energy meaning in accessing indigenous energy, what is in the land where we are, and a return to being powered by environmental income. And here at Butterfly Power, we really look at this phase of massive human growth as really a caterpillar phase where we were really acquired a lot of mass through consumption of environmental capital. But now we have the opportunity to be the butterfly generation. And as we make the return to primary energy, we now have the ability to support humans in not only a sustainable, but a regenerative capacity. And also that many times when we talk about making the switch to primary energy, it's not that we're going to stop using secondary energy sources soon, but we do have the capacity to radically reduce them, in that in the future, we're going to have the ability to stop burning them. We're always going to use petroleum and natural gas, and coal have a lot of other very important functions and benefits beyond just burning them to create electrical power. Thank you for taking the time to view this section of the United States agrivoltaic energy storage and EV microgrid market intelligence analysis. Really deeply hope that you found this really valuable and hopefully inspiring. And if you're not watching the entire section on butterflypower.org, really encourage you to come and see all sections to get the totality of this amazing opportunity. And regardless of what channel you're finding this transmission, would be deeply appreciative if you give it some love, give it a like, and share it with a farmer or a rancher or anyone who's interested in participating in the regenerative transformation our economy, our energy sector, and our environment. Any investors who are looking at an amazing opportunity to transform their capital into the regenerative future. And it's just a deep honor and blessing to be here in this time and to participate in this great work. And we are the butterfly generation. It's time to rise and shine, time to transform and fly.